A debt recorded in darkness must be paid in light. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the deep survey vessel Steward. Before her, the main viewport showed nothing. It was a perfect starless void that drank the light and offered only cold indifference in return. This was the Obsidian Anchorage, a gravitational anomaly wrapped in myth and the final resting place of something humanity had lost long ago. The stakes were simple: an absolute claim what slept here for the Coalition, or lose it to those who would twist its purpose. Somewhere in that velvet blackness, a sigil lay dormant on a hull unseen for millennia, its sleeping arrays holding the power to remake star systems. Magister Report Eva said, her voice a low counterpoint to the bridge's soft hum. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and the faint, sharp scent of stressed electronics. A hololith of a calm, androgynous face shimmered into existence beside her command chair. The consensus of Air's fleet remains 2 hours out. Commander, the AI stated, its tone perfectly neutral. They are broadcasting their claim on all channels, citing the Progenitor Legacy Accords. Their legal argument is predictable. Predictable but not baseless. Tactical Officer Jian Li grumbled from his station. He was a man built of sharp angles and sharper opinions. They believe inheritance is a right, not a responsibility. We need to find it before they do. The anchorage was a graveyard. It sat at the edge of a collapsed Dyson sphere, shattered rings of ancient matter that caught the light of a distant nebula like cosmic dust on a tombstone. Gravitational tides here were a nightmare, forcing ships to crawl where they would normally sprint. But the prize was worth the risk. Legends called it the Saint of Soul, a warship from the first expansion. A vessel that single-handedly ended the Xylosian rebellions, not with overwhelming force, but with something far stranger, something the records only called a perfect accounting. The ship, or its echo, was here. Its faint rhythmic hum was a ghost on their most sensitive instruments. They were miners of legends, digging in a grave of stars. "Been anything on the deep resonance scans?" Eva asked, turning her attention to the science station. Systems analyst. Ben Carter shook his head, pushing a stray lock of blonde hair from his eyes. "Still just the one source, Commander. It's not a transmission. It feels more like a heartbeat, slow and impossibly heavy. Every other reading is being warped around it. Whatever is in there doesn't just have mass, it has presence. The consensus is accelerating." Jian suddenly announced, his knuckles white on his console. "They're burning their drives hot. They'll be here in 40 minutes. This was the first escalation. Their careful, methodical approach was now a frantic race against a closing clock. Eva felt the familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Every commander knew this feeling the moment a plan met reality and shattered. The cost of failure here was not just a lost prize. It was the potential unleashing of a power no one understood into the hands of fanatics who believed they were owed it. She took a breath, the recycled air suddenly feeling thin and inadequate. "Magister, plot a direct intercept course to the source of the resonance," she ordered. "Minimum safe distance. Jian, I want active scans on the consensus fleet. I need to know the second they launch a probe or a drone." "They will view a direct approach as provocation," Magister noted calmly. "The probability of a hostile response increases by 73%. "We're already in a hostile situation," Eva countered, her gaze fixed on the void. "We just haven't started firing yet. Take us in." The universe does not bargain. It only observes. The steward moved like a scalpel through the distorted space-time of the anchorage. Shards of the Dyson ring, miles across, tumbled in silent, slow-motion chaos around them. Eva watched them pass their dead surfaces, pocked with craters from eons of micrometeorite impacts. It was a place of profound and terrible silence, a testament to an ambition that had outstripped its foundation. The hum on the sensors grew stronger, a bass note that vibrated through the deck plates, a tangible force pressing against the ship's hull. I'm detecting exotic particle decay, Ben said, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. Things that shouldn't exist outside of a singularity's event horizon. The source is, it's not emitting them. It's shedding them like dust. We're 10,000 kilometers out, Gian reported, his eyes darting across his tactical display. Consensus fleet is deploying skirmish drones. They're painting us with targeting locks. Hold steady, Eva commanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. The pressure was immense, a physical weight in the command deck. Her gaze never left the viewport, waiting for the first glimpse of the relic. She was betting everything on a hunch, on a line from a fragmented historical text that said the Saint of Soul never fired the first shot. It waited. It judged. It presented a bill. A new icon appeared on the main screen, a single point of data in the overwhelming blackness. It was not a ship. It was a shape, a perfect obsidian sphere 1 kilometer in diameter. It reflected nothing. No light, no sensor pings, no radiation. It was a hole in the universe, a piece of absolute void given form. The sleeping arrays were not visible. They were part of its impossible skin. This was not a weapon. It was a verdict. Magister, what are we looking at? Eva whispered the question, feeling utterly inadequate. Analysis is inconclusive, Commander, the AI replied. Its gravitational signature is equivalent to a small moon, yet its material composition is unknown. It is not broadcasting, yet the resonance is clearly emanating from its core. It is by all measurable standards an object that cannot exist. A civilian freighter captain on the outer colonies of the sector watched the news feed with a growing sense of dread. He was hauling agricultural equipment to a new settlement, a place of hope and hard work. He saw the reports of coalition and consensus fleets converging on the Obsidian anchorage. He had heard the stories as a child, whispers of an ancient guardian that slept between the stars. He prayed it was just a story. His family, his cargo, his entire future depended on the stability these great powers claimed to provide. War over a ghost ship would burn it all to ash. The consensus fleet arrived. 12 cruisers, sleek and aggressive, formed a crescent formation 1,000,000 kilometers from the Steward. Their lead vessel, the Claim of Ages, opened a channel. An old man's face, stern and etched with the lines of unshakable conviction, appeared on Eva's screen. This was Archon Valerius. Coalition Vessel Steward, he began, his voice raspy but firm. You are trespassing in a consecrated system. The artifact you are observing is the rightful inheritance of the consensus of heirs by the blood of the first families. Withdraw now or be removed. Archon Valerius. Eva responded, keeping her voice even. This is a restricted zone under Coalition Survey Authority. We are conducting a scientific mission. The artifact's origin and purpose are unknown. It belongs to no one until it is understood. A calculation of ownership is the first theft. Valerius's lips thinned into a bloodless line. We understand it perfectly, Commander. It is our past and our future. You have one final warning. The channel closed. He's launching his main drone swarm, Gian said, his fingers flying across his console. 50 units closing fast. They're not armed with warheads. Looks like grapplers, plasma cutters. A salvage team. He thinks he can just cut it open, Ben murmured in disbelief. Like a can. This was the second escalation. The consensus wasn't just posturing. They were acting. They saw the sphere as property, a machine to be dismantled and used. They were looters dressed in the robes of pilgrims. Eva knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was the absolute wrong approach. This was a test, and Valerius was failing it spectacularly. Magister Eva said, her mind racing. Can we disrupt the drones without destroying them? Electronic warfare. Feasible, the AI responded. We can attempt to scramble their command signals. However, their fleet is providing powerful countermeasures. Success is not guaranteed. Do it, Eva ordered. Gian, do not fire on the drones unless they target us directly. Focus on jamming. Ben, I need you to try something different. Forget scanning it. Try talking to it. Ben looked up, confused. Talking to it? Commander, with what language? What protocol? Not with words, Eva clarified, leaning forward. With data. Pure, unencrypted data. Send it our ship's charter. Send it the Coalition's founding principles. Send it every law, every treaty, every ethical debate we have on record. This is how you petition a ghost of law. Magister's holographic face turned to her. Commander, transmitting that volume of raw data is strategically unsound. It will reveal our operational parameters, our security protocols, our entire command philosophy to the consensus. They think it's a machine, Eva insisted, her eyes locked on the impassive sphere. But it's not. The legends called it a saint. Saints aren't machines. They are ideals given form. It doesn't want a key. It wants a reason. For a long moment, the AI was silent. The low hum from the sphere seemed to intensify a resonant query that asked everything and said nothing. Outside, the steward's electronic warfare suites began to scream into the void, tangling the command signals of the consensus drones. The small craft swerved and faltered, their coordination breaking down. The core logic of your command is unconventional, Magister finally said. But the potential payoff is significant. Transmitting the archives now. A torrent of information, the legal and moral bedrock of an entire civilization, flowed from the steward towards the obsidian sphere. It was a desperate gambit, a baring of the soul in the face of the unknown. It was an act of profound trust, or perhaps profound foolishness. For 30 seconds that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The sphere remained inert. The consensus drones, recovering from the initial jamming, began to push forward again, their plasma cutters glowing with malevolent heat. Valerius's voice boomed over an open channel. Your interference is noted, steward. This is your final warning. Any further obstruction will be met with force. A single warning shot echoes as 1,000 declarations. Then a single high-energy beam lanced out from the claim of ages. It wasn't aimed to kill, but to intimidate. It struck the steward's forward shields, making the entire vessel shudder. The lights on the bridge flickered, and a shower of sparks erupted from a secondary console. The deck plates groaned in protest. Shields at 80% from that one hit, Gian yelled. Minor energy bleed on deck 4. This was the third escalation. The line had been crossed. The first shot was fired. This was the moment of truth. Every instinct screamed at Eva to return fire to defend her ship and her crew. But she looked at the sphere, at the torrent of data still flowing into it, and she made a choice. Hold your fire, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even herself. Do not retaliate. Ben, I want you to add one more thing to the data stream. Transmit our complete operational logs for this mission. Everything. Unredacted. Every order I've given. Every debate we've had. Let it see our calculus. Commander, that's insane, Gian protested. They'll see our every weakness. The consensus won't be the one reading it. Eva said, her eyes fixed on the obsidian enigma before them. Magister, do it. The AI paused for a mere fraction of a second. Executing command. We are transmitting your ledger, Commander. The complete, unvarnished truth of their mission poured into the void. It was a record of doubt, of caution, of a desire to understand, rather than to conquer. It was a testament to their restraint. As the final bits of data left the steward's transmitters, a change occurred. A single line of pale green light appeared on the surface of the sphere. It branched, bifurcating again and again, spreading across the blackness like cracks in ice. The intricate pattern was a sigil of impossible complexity, a circuit diagram for the soul of a starship. The hum intensified, rising in pitch, until it was no longer a sound, but a pervasive feeling, a presence that filled the minds of every person on the bridge. It was ancient, vast, and utterly implacably patient. Then came the words, not through the comms, but directly into their consciousness, a wave of pure concept. The light from the sigil pulsed a slow, steady beat. The ledger must be balanced. The question hung in the silence of the bridge, a query of cosmic importance posed to a single human commander. Outside, the consensus fleet, seeing the light on the sphere as a sign that their efforts were succeeding, began to advance. Their weapon ports opened, glowing with the promise of overwhelming firepower. Eva Rostova looked at the approaching fleet, then at the glowing pattern on the sphere. She knew her answer. It was not a question about retribution or punishment. It was a question about cost. About the debt that is incurred when one party acts without honor. She thought of the colonists who just wanted to build their homes in peace. She thought of the rule of law that the coalition, for all its faults, tried to uphold. She thought of the consensus so blinded by their perceived birthright that they were willing to start a war over a relic they did not comprehend. The price of justice, Eva said, her voice clear and unwavering, speaking to her crew, and to the ancient presence before them, is that the debt must be paid by the debtor. Not by others. Not in blood, but in kind. The cost must be a mirror of the transgression. She looked at Magister. It teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, she murmured, recalling the line from the old texts. It never uses collars or chains. It balances the books. The green light on the sphere flared. The resonance from the sphere vanished. For a terrifying second, there was only silence. Then the shattered fragments of the Dyson ring throughout the obsidian anchorage began to move. Not randomly, but with purpose. Huge continent-sized plates of dead matter shifted their orientation, their ancient dormant station-keeping drives flaring to life with an ethereal green light. They were moving to intercept the consensus fleet. Magister, what is happening? Gian breathed his tactical display, a cascading wave of alerts. The artifact. It has taken control of the entire Dyson remnant. The AI stated a hint of something that might have been awe in its synthesized voice. It is not a ship. It is the operating system for this entire system. The anchorage is its weapon. A mirror shows you nothing but the truth of your own actions. Archon Valerius, on the bridge of the Claim of Ages, watched in horror as his drones were swatted from the sky by chunks of rock the size of cities. His fleet, which had been poised for a triumphant execution, was suddenly caught in a closing net of impossible scale. The fragments were not simply moving, they were creating a gravitational labyrinth, funneling his ships into a tightly controlled corridor. It's not attacking them. Ben set his eyes wide as he stared at his science console. It's containing them. It's using localized gravity wells to hold them in place. They can't move. They can't escape. The obsidian sphere, now pulsing with a soft viridian glow, sent another message, this one for the steward's eyes only. A simple ledger entry appeared on the main screen. Debtor consensus of Air's fleet. Transgression, unlawful use of force. 1 count energy weapon. Payment forfeiture of equivalent kinetic and energy potential. On Gian's tactical display, the power readings of the 12 consensus cruisers began to plummet. Their weapons went dark. Their engines sputtered and died. Their shields collapsed into nothing. The Viridian Ledger, as it now seemed to call itself, was draining them dry, taking exactly what they had been prepared to expend in violence. It was a perfect, chillingly precise act of accounting. The first lesson is always about cost. The sphere held the consensus fleet immobile in its gravitational prison, surrounded by the reanimated ghosts of the Dyson ring. It had not destroyed them. It had simply removed their ability to cause harm. It had taken their payment. Eva Rostova watched the scene unfold, a profound sense of awe washing over her. She had come seeking a weapon, a piece of strategic hardware. She had found a teacher, a judge, an arbiter of a law so old It was written in the language of physics itself. "Magister," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "open a channel to the Coalition High Command. Tell them we have made contact with the Saint of Soul, and tell them its name is the Viridian Ledger." The AI turned its serene face to her. "And what will you tell them is its purpose, Commander?" Ava looked at the humbled consensus fleet, trapped and powerless. She looked at the ancient patient sphere that held them in its grasp. It was not a weapon of war. It was a tool of cosmic jurisprudence. "Its purpose," she said, "is to teach." The silence that followed was broken by Ben. "Commander, it's sending us something else." A new query. On the screen beneath the finalized ledger entry, new text appeared written in the same stark, simple format. The question was not for the Coalition. It was not for humanity. It was for her. For Ava Rostova. To accept meant becoming the arbiter, the one who brought cases before this ancient court. To refuse. What would happen if she refused? Would it simply go back to sleep, leaving the universe to its chaotic, unjust ways? Or would it find another, perhaps less scrupulous petitioner? A sense of duty is the heaviest armor. "It's asking if you want to be its partner," Gian said, his usual cynicism replaced by a sense of wonder. "It's asking you to be the one who points it at the guilty." "That is an oversimplification," Magister corrected gently. "It is asking her to be the one who presents the evidence. The ledger itself remains the judge." Eva looked at the screen, at the simple, terrifying question. This was a burden no single person should ever have to bear. The power to bring the weight of a star system down upon anyone she deemed unjust. It was a temptation, a corruption waiting to happen. But the alternative, letting this power lie fallow or fall into the hands of men like Valerius, was unthinkable. The path forward was clear, and it was impossibly difficult. She thought about her oath as a coalition officer, to protect, to serve, to uphold the law. This was the ultimate extension of that oath. It was a promise made not just to her government, but to the fundamental balance of the universe itself. Before she could answer, a new series of alerts chimed. It wasn't from Gian's tactical station. It was from Ben's long-range sensors. "Commander," he said, his voice strained, "I'm detecting multiple high-energy jump signatures. Not consensus. Not coalition. They're older. Much older. Much." The space around the obsidian anchorage began to tear open as ships emerged from folds in reality. They were not the sleek, functional designs of the current age. They were baroque, ornate, covered in strange sigils and emitting energy signatures that defied modern classification. There were at least 50 of them. A salvage master monitoring the events from a clandestine listening post hidden in a nearby asteroid field spat out his stim chew. He had been hoping to sneak in after the big players fought each other to a standstill and pick up some valuable scrap. But this was different. Those new ships, they weren't scavengers or military. They moved with the eerie precision of a hive. This was a nest being stirred. He began to power down his systems, hoping to disappear into the cold. "They're broadcasting an insignia," Gian reported, his voice tight. "It's an old one. From the Schism Wars. The Cult of the Final Reckoning." The lead vessel of the cultist fleet, a massive cathedral-like dreadnought, opened a channel. A woman's face, pale and fanatical, filled the screen. Her eyes burned with a cold fire. "We have heard the song of the awakened god," she hissed, her voice echoing, as if in a vast chamber. "We are its chosen instruments. The age of mortal law is over. The age of divine judgment is at hand. Surrender the holy arbiter to us, its true disciples, or be cleansed in its righteous fire." The faithful are often the first to become heretics. Eva stared at the zealot on the screen. This was a complication she could never have predicted. Not looters, not legalists, but true believers. They didn't want to use the ledger. They wanted to worship it. and they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. The Viridian Ledger sent another message for her alone. Eva now stood between two fleets of fanatics and an awakened artifact of unimaginable power. One group was disarmed and imprisoned. The other was fresh armed to the teeth and driven by a faith that knew no compromise, and the ancient intelligence at the heart of the system was waiting, watching for her to make the next move. The burden she was considering had just grown infinitely heavier. She had to be more than a petitioner. She had to be a shield. Magister Ava said, her resolve hardening into something cold and sharp. What is the combat readiness of the steward? We are at 92% operational capacity, Commander. Our shields are regenerating. All weapon systems are online. And the ledger, she asked. It is. Waiting, the AI replied. Its energy levels are stable. The Dyson fragments remain under its control. It is observing the new arrivals with the same patience it showed the consensus. Eva looked at the cultist fleet, a swarm of predatory angels gathering in the darkness. They saw the ledger as a god, a tool to enforce their twisted version of morality on the galaxy. They were just as dangerous as the consensus, but in a much more insidious way. Valerius wanted to own the law. These fanatics wanted to become it. A law without compassion is just an equation of pain. She had her answer. For the ledger and for herself. Ben, transmit my response to the ledger. She commanded, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. What is the message, Commander? I accept. The word, a single pulse of acceptance, echoed in the silent space of Eva's mind. It was a commitment as binding as any law of physics. On the main screen, the cultist Hierophant's face twisted in fury, her fanatical calm shattering like glass. She had clearly intercepted the brief data-dense transmission of Eva's acceptance to the ledger. She saw it not as a choice, but as a blasphemy. The machine speaks to the unbeliever, the Hierophant snarled, her voice losing its ethereal echo and taking on a raw human hatred. It offers its grace to the unworthy. This is the final test. The great arbiter wishes to see its true children cleanse the temple of the heretic. She's not trying to convince us, Gian said, his hands already a blur across his tactical controls. She's firing up her flock. That was a sermon, not a threat. Incoming energy spikes across their entire fleet, Ben confirmed, his voice sharp with alarm. They're not powering up for a warning shot. That's a fleet-wide Alpha Strike profile. Ava felt the weight of her new mantle settle upon her. It was heavier than a mountain swoon. She had just accepted stewardship of a cosmic balance, and her first act would be to preside over a battle. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. But there was no time for reflection. The cult was not a petitioner. They were a storm. The first duty of a judge is to protect the court. Magister, I need to petition the ledger. Eva said, her focus narrowing to a single point. The cult of the final reckoning has declared their intent to use unlawful force. Their charter is dogma, and their plea is violence. They seek to seize control of a sentient legal entity. Present this as evidence. Framing the petition now. Commander, the AI replied, its holographic face a mask of placid concentration. What remedy do you request? This was the crux of it. The terrible, wonderful, and terrifying choice. She could ask for their destruction. The ledger had already demonstrated its ability to neutralize a fleet. A quiet word from her, a carefully phrased request, and 50 ships full of zealots could be turned into cold, dead metal. But that would make her no better than them, using overwhelming power to solve a problem of faith. It would be a failure of her first test as steward. A mirror held to a zealot only shows them a martyr. We will not request destruction, Eva stated firmly. That is the response of a blunt instrument, not an arbiter. This artifact teaches. It remembers by numbers and it balances by ledgers. The cult's greatest weapon is their certainty, their faith. That is the asset we must target. Aboard the cultist dreadnought. Righteous sanction. A young acolyte named Ilara watched her parents strap into their fire control station. Their faces were alight with ecstatic purpose, their eyes reflecting the green glow of the weapon-charging indicators. For the reckoning, her father shouted over the ship's internal comms, his voice filled with a joy that chilled her to the bone. Elara believed she truly did, but the silent obsidian sphere didn't feel like a vengeful god. It felt quiet. It felt like the ancient silence in the archives, a place of records, not rage. My petition, Eva continued, her thoughts racing to form a coherent legal argument for a being of pure law, is for an audit. The cult claims divine right. They act on what they believe is a sacred history. I petition the Viridian Ledger to perform a complete accounting of their history, their actions, and their founding principles. Let it present its findings. Let the truth be the verdict. Commander, you are asking it to fight a war of information, Jian asked, his skepticism clear. They'll just call it heresy and open fire. They will open fire anyway, Eva countered. But we will not meet their fire with fire. We will meet it with truth. Magister, can the Ledger do it? Can it access their records? Can it project that information? The cult's networks are heavily encrypted, but they are broadcasting their dogma on an open channel to inspire their fleet, Magister reported. It is possible the Ledger could use that broadcast as an ingress point. As for projection, the Dyson fragments are configurable resonant arrays. If provided with sufficient power and data, they could theoretically be turned into a projection system of unimaginable scale and fidelity. The first volley of plasma torpedoes and particle lances erupted from the cultist fleet. They crossed the void like a swarm of angry incandescent insects. This is the inevitable argument of the unquestioning. Here it comes, Jian shouted. Brace for impact. The steward shuddered as its shields absorbed the initial impacts. Energy flared brilliant and violent against the invisible barrier. On the bridge, the lights dimmed and alarms blared. The deck plates vibrated with a low, bone-jarring thrum. Shields at 70% and falling, Jian called out. We can't take another volley like that. The petition has been sent, Commander Magister said calmly amidst the chaos. The obsidian sphere seemed to consider the request for a long, agonizing moment. The cultist weapons continued to pour fire onto the steward's straining defenses. Then the green sigil on its surface pulsed brightly. A new message, a simple ledger entry, appeared on the screen for Eva's eyes only. Debtor cult of the final reckoning. Transgression, unlawful use of force. Multiple counts, energy weapons. Payment forfeiture of emitted energy for purposes of public record. A vast network of pale green energy tendrils erupted from the Viridian Ledger. They didn't strike the cultist ships. They spread outwards, connecting with the massive shattered plates of the Dyson ring. The ancient surfaces, dark for millennia, began to glow with the same Viridian light. Simultaneously, the incoming barrage of enemy fire began to dissolve. What's happening? Eva asked, her knuckles white on her command chair. It's not blocking their fire, Ben said. His voice filled with awe. It's absorbing it. Every shot they fire is being rerouted, the energy siphoned directly into the Dyson fragments. Their anger was now the fuel for their own judgment. The Hierophant on the screen stared in disbelief as her fleet's devastating alpha strike vanished into thin air, feeding the very system she sought to control. More power, she screamed. Overload its defenses, the Arbiter tests our devotion. Her fleet obeyed, intensifying their fire. And in response, the glow of the Dyson ring grew brighter, more intense. The fragments began to reorient themselves not as shields, but as lenses. They were focusing the stolen energy, shaping it. Then the broadcast began. It was not a sound, but a projection, an image and a feeling beamed directly into the mind of every single person in the system. It overrode the cult's own internal comms. It silenced their battle hymns and their prayers. It was a perfect objective and utterly damning history of the cult of the final reckoning. The projection started not with a god, but with a man. A charismatic colony administrator named Lorien centuries ago standing before the wreckage of a failed first contact. An alien probe, non-sentient but highly reactive, had misinterpreted the colony's mining operations as a threat and sterilized half the planet. Lorien, a survivor racked with guilt and grief, had twisted the tragedy into a narrative of divine punishment and mortal failure. He wasn't a prophet. He was a traumatized politician. The ledger showed the original data logs from the event pristine and uncorrupted. It showed Lorien altering the records, fabricating the story of a divine arbiter that had judged them. It showed him creating the dogma, the rituals, the entire religion, as a way to control the terrified survivors and give their suffering meaning. It was all there. Every lie. Every manipulation. Every calculated step that had led from a tragic accident to a militant expansionist cult. A foundation of lies cannot support a temple of truth. On the bridge of the righteous sanction, the Hierophant watched her face a mask of horror. She was seeing the unvarnished truth of her faith, and it was a cheap political forgery. The broadcast continued, showing how each successive Hierophant had added to the lie, consolidating power, inventing new scripture to justify their holy wars and tithes. It was a ledger of their sins written in the light of their own weapons. Aboard the other cultist ships, there was chaos. Alara watched as her parents stared at the mental projection, their faces slack with shock and disillusionment. The joyful certainty was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening emptiness. The battle chatter had ceased, replaced by confused questions, then angry accusations. "It's a trick! A blasphemy from the unbeliever," the Hierophant shrieked, but her voice was weak, desperate. The evidence was too perfect, too complete. The ledger was using their own ship's historical archives, unlocked and presented for all to see, to cross-reference the public record. It was showing them their own hidden truths. Their fleet's cohesion shattered. Some ships stopped firing their engines, drifting aimlessly. Others turned on their neighbors, firing wildly in confusion and rage. The unified storm had become a squabbling, broken mob. Their faith, the bedrock of their existence, had been audited and found fraudulent. The ledger had not destroyed a single ship, but it had utterly annihilated their reason to fight. Oh. The most complete defeat is the destruction of a cause. It's working. Gian whispered his tactical display, showing the cultist fleet in complete disarray. They're tearing themselves apart. Eva felt a profound sadness. These people had built their lives on a lie born from pain. The truth was necessary, but it was also cruel. This was the cost of justice. It was not always clean, and it was never painless. She had won, but it did not feel like a victory. It felt like a necessary, brutal surgery. One ship, however, did not falter. The Hierophant's dreadnought, the righteous sanction. Driven by the final desperate conviction of a woman who had lost everything, it ceased firing on the steward and began a direct suicidal burn towards the obsidian sphere. "She's going to ram it," Gian stated, his voice cold and professional again. "Impact in 90 seconds. "Can we stop her?" Eva asked. "Negative," Gian replied. "She's running too hot. We can't get a weapons lock and our shields won't hold if we put ourselves in her path." The Hierophant's face appeared on the screen one last time, no longer broadcast to her fleet, but aimed directly at Eva. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes burning with a terrifying, nihilistic fire. "If the god is false," she screamed, her voice breaking, "then the temple must fall. We will be the final reckoning ourselves. A debt cannot be paid by erasing the creditor." The massive dreadnought plunged toward the impassive sphere. Eva knew she had to act. This wasn't about faith anymore. This was a direct physical threat to the ledger. "Magister," she said, her voice low and hard. "New petition. The vessel Righteous Sanction has rejected the verdict of the audit. It now seeks to destroy a legal entity to escape its own accounting. This is an act of ultimate contempt for the law. I request enforcement. She did not say destruction. She chose her word with surgical precision. Enforcement. The word hung in the air, cold and final. The Viridian ledger responded instantly. The Dyson fragments which had been projecting the audit now swiveled their green glow, intensifying into a hard, brilliant white. They focused not on the ship, but on the space directly in front of it. The dreadnought was traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The ledger did not fire a weapon. It simply acted. It manipulated the gravity directly in the ship's path, creating a wall of space-time as dense as a neutron star. The Righteous Sanction did not explode. It simply ceased to exist. Its own immense kinetic energy turned back upon itself in an instant of silent, perfect annihilation. There was a brief, blinding flash of light, and then nothing. The space where the dreadnought had been was empty. The debt was paid. A profound silence descended upon the command deck of the steward. The cultist fleet was in shambles, leaderless and broken. The consensus fleet was still held in its powerless prison. The obsidian anchorage, once a place of myth and shadow, was now the stage for the most significant legal precedent in 1,000 years. The steward had taken damage. The portside sensor antenna was melted slag, and the energy bleed on Deck 4 had started a small but contained fire. Chief Engineer Patel reported they were operating on 60% power. 2 crew members had sustained minor burns. The cost of victory was real, etched into the hull of her ship and the faces of her crew. But they were alive. They had prevailed. A scar on a ship is a record of a lesson learned. The remaining cultist ships began broadcasting unconditional surrenders not to the coalition, but directly to the Viridian Ledger itself. They were no longer a military force. They were a congregation without a faith seeking guidance from the very entity they had tried to enslave. Ben looked up from his console. Commander, the Ledger. Its energy readings are dropping. Significantly. That last enforcement and the system-wide broadcast, it cost it something. The brilliant green sigil on the sphere was fading to a soft, dim pulse. The Dyson fragments were returning to their dormant state. The great machine was tired. It was not infinite. It had paid a price too. Just then new jump signatures appeared. Dozens of them. This time they were familiar. Coalition Command had arrived. The flagship, the CNS Vigilance, a vessel 10 times the size of the Steward, slid out of hyperspace, followed by a full carrier group. Admiral Quintus, a man known for his rigid adherence to protocol, appeared on Eva's screen. His face was grim. Commander Rostova, he began, his voice like grinding stones. You have violated 17 different contact protocols. You have engaged 2 separate fleets without authorization. You have, by all reports, activated an Omega-class artifact. You are to stand down your command and prepare to be boarded. We are taking control of this system and the asset within it. Eva felt a chill go through her. After everything, it was going to end like this. The politicians and the generals sweeping in to claim the prize, to turn this profound legal engine into just another weapon in their arsenal. They would not understand it. They would try to collar it, to chain it, and it would reject them, or worse, judge them. But before she could respond, Magister spoke. With respect, Admiral, the AI said, its voice perfectly calm. That will not be possible. The entity known as the Viridian Ledger has already established a legal precedent. It has chosen its own interlocutor. Commander Rostova does not command the asset. She is the steward of its court. A new data packet was sent from the steward to the Admiral's flagship. It was a complete unredacted log of the entire encounter, including every petition Eva had made and every action the ledger had taken. It was accompanied by a single final message from the ledger itself displayed on the Vigilance's main bridge screen for all to see. Precedent. The Anchorage Accord. Class Omega entity, Viridian Ledger, is recognized as a sovereign legal jurisdiction. All petitions and communications are to be channeled through the ratified office of the steward. Any attempt to subvert this office via force or coercion will be recorded as contempt. The ledger is now in recess. The law once written binds the hands of kings and admirals alike. Admiral Quintus stared at the message, then at Eva's tired but resolute face on his screen. He was a man of law of protocol, and he was looking at the creation of a new law, one backed by the power to unmake fleets. He could not fight it. He could not ignore it. He was bound by it. A slow, grudging respect dawned in his eyes. Very well. Steward Rostova, he said, the new title feeling strange on his tongue. It seems you have a new command. High Command will have questions. He cut the channel. The battle was over. The fleets were humbled. A new power had entered the galactic stage, not one of conquest, but of balance. Eva looked out at the obsidian anchorage. The shattered rings of the Dyson sphere no longer looked like a graveyard. They looked like the scales of justice waiting patiently for the next case to be brought before them. The arrays were cooling now, the faint green light fading completely, leaving only the silent, perfect obsidian sphere and the star-dusted dark. On her command screen, a final ledger entry blinked silently into existence, a permanent record of the day's events. Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of her scarred ship, no longer just a commander in the Coalition fleet, but something more, something ancient. She was the keeper of a promise, the presenter of evidence, the one who would speak for those who could not before a judge, that could not be bribed or broken. Her arc of doubt had been forged into the steel of stewardship. The weight was immense, but for the first time she felt strong enough to carry it. Justice was not a thing you found or a thing you fought for. It was a debt that had to be carefully, precisely, and honorably recorded so that it could one day be paid. A single truthful entry can balance an entire universe of lies.